He stood at his bathroom mirror, staring at a reflection he barely recognized. The man looking back at him wasn't the person he'd dreamed of becoming. His eyes carried the weight of countless broken promises to himself. His body showed the evidence of neglect. His spirit felt hollow, emptied by years of choosing the easy path over the meaningful one. This wasn't supposed to be his story. At 28, Marcus had believed success would find him naturally. He had talent. He had intelligence. He had dreams that burned bright in his chest like stars waiting to explode into supernovas. But somewhere between his early 20s and this moment, those dreams had dimmed to barely visible embers. He was 50 pounds overweight, drowning in debt, and his relationships were falling apart like old photographs left in the rain. His career had stagnated into a series of Monday mornings that felt like prison sentences. Each day blended into the next in a gray blur of mediocrity. But what Marcus didn't understand yet was that this moment of brutal honesty with himself would become the first domino in a sequence that would reshape everything. He didn't know that the smallest shift in his daily routine was about to unlock a force so powerful it would seem almost magical. The compound effect was waiting to work its quiet miracle. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that seemed insignificant at the time. Instead of hitting the snooze button 3 times as he had for the past 5 years, he got up immediately when his alarm rang at 6 a.m. Just one decision. One moment of choosing discomfort over comfort. He walked to his kitchen, and instead of grabbing his usual sugar-laden coffee drink, he made black coffee and added just a splash of milk. A tiny change, so small that his roommate wouldn't even notice. Then he did something that would have made his past self laugh with disbelief. He put on his old running shoes, the ones buried under a pile of clothes in his closet, and he walked outside. Not to run, not yet, just to walk around the block. 22 minutes later, he returned home. His heart was beating slightly faster than usual, and there was something different in his chest. Not pride exactly, but a small spark of something he'd forgotten existed. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, he could trust himself again. Day 2 arrived with the same choice: snooze or rise. This time, the decision felt fractionally easier. The pattern was forming, like water beginning to carve its path through stone. Walk around the block, black coffee with milk, small choices that whispered rather than shouted. By day 7, something unexpected happened. Marcus found himself looking forward to his morning walk. His body began to crave movement instead of the couch. The coffee tasted cleaner, more honest somehow. But the real magic was happening beneath the surface, invisible to the naked eye. Week 3 brought a revelation disguised as a mundane Tuesday morning. As Marcus laced up his shoes, he realized he felt lighter. Not just physically, though he'd lost 3 pounds without trying. He felt mentally clearer, as if someone had wiped clean the windows of his perception. The compound effect was beginning its patient work. He started reading for 15 minutes each morning after his walk. Just 15 minutes. Not enough to finish books quickly, but enough to feed his mind something nourishing instead of the mental junk food of social media scrolling. Small deposit. Compound interest on his intellect. Week 6 arrived with a phone call that would have terrified the old Marcus. His supervisor offered him a chance to lead a project that could advance his career. The old Marcus would have made excuses, found reasons why he wasn't ready. But something had shifted. His daily investments in himself had created a reserve of confidence he could draw from. he said yes. Not because he felt completely ready, but because his small daily victories had taught him that he could figure things out as he went, that he could trust his ability to grow into challenges. The project demanded more from him than he'd given to anything in years. Early mornings became even earlier as he researched, planned, and executed. But his body was stronger now from months of consistent movement. His mind was sharper from consistent reading. His spirit was more resilient from the daily practice of keeping promises to himself. Month 4 brought the first major compound dividend. Marcus stepped on the scale to discover he'd lost 28 pounds. Not through any dramatic diet or extreme exercise program, but through the accumulation of small, sustainable choices made day after day. His colleagues began noticing changes too. The project he was leading was gaining attention from senior management. His ideas were sharper, his presentation clearer, his confidence more authentic. The daily reading had expanded his vocabulary and perspective. The physical activity had increased his energy and mental clarity. But the most profound change was in how he saw himself. He began to understand that he was not a victim of his circumstances, but the author of his daily choices. Every morning when he chose to get up instead of hitting snooze, he was writing a story of discipline. Every time he chose the walk over the couch, he was authoring resilience. Every page he read was a sentence in a larger narrative of growth. The compound effect wasn't just changing his body or his career, it was rewriting his identity. Month 8 arrived with news that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. The project Marcus led had exceeded all expectations, resulting in significant cost savings for the company. His supervisor called him into her office, not for criticism, but for promotion. As he sat across from her desk, listening to her outline his new responsibilities and salary increase, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the promotion, but for that morning 8 months ago when he'd chosen to get up instead of hitting snooze. That one small decision had set in motion a cascade of changes that now seemed almost miraculous. But Marcus was just beginning to understand the true power of what he'd unleashed. With his increased income, he could finally address his debt systematically. Instead of making minimum payments, he began applying extra money toward his loans. The same principle that had transformed his health and career now worked on his finances. Small additional payments, compounding into financial freedom. He also noticed that his relationships were improving. The discipline he developed in other areas of his life naturally extended to how he treated others. He became more present in conversations, more reliable in commitments, more generous with his time and attention. The compound effect rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Year 2 began with Marcus looking in the same bathroom mirror where his transformation had started. The reflection looking back at him was almost unrecognizable, but in the best possible way. He'd lost 45 pounds and gained muscle definition he'd never had, even in his 20s. His posture was straighter, his eyes brighter, his smile more genuine. But the external changes were just symptoms of something deeper. He'd read 68 books in the past year, expanding his mind and perspective in ways that touched every aspect of his life. His vocabulary had grown, his critical thinking had sharpened, and his understanding of the world had deepened. Professionally, he'd been promoted again and was now leading a team of 12 people. His reputation for reliability and innovative thinking had spread throughout the company. Headhunters were calling with offers from competitor firms. Financially, he'd paid off all his credit card debt and had built an emergency fund that gave him a security he'd never known. The same small, consistent investments that had transformed his body and mind were now building his wealth. But perhaps most importantly, he'd learned to trust himself again. The person who used to make promises to himself and break them within days had become someone whose word, even to himself, was unshakable. When he set a goal, he had confidence it would be achieved, not because success was guaranteed, but because he'd proven to himself that he could maintain consistent action over time. This inner transformation attracted others into his life who shared his commitment to growth and excellence. His social circle evolved from people who supported mediocrity to those who inspired greatness. He met Sarah, a woman who matched his commitment to personal development, and their relationship began with a foundation of two whole people choosing to build something together rather than two broken people seeking completion in each other. Year 3 brought challenges that would have crushed the old Marcus. His company went through a major restructuring that eliminated several positions, including some at his level. But instead of panicking as he would have in the past, Marcus saw opportunity. His 3 years of consistent reading had given him knowledge in areas his colleagues lacked. His physical fitness had given him energy and mental clarity that allowed him to work longer and think more creatively under pressure. His financial discipline had provided a safety net that allowed him to take calculated risks. When the dust settled, Marcus had not only kept his position, but had been given additional responsibilities and a team twice the size of his previous one. The compound effect of his daily investments had created capabilities that made him invaluable during precisely the moments when others were most vulnerable. But the most profound realization was yet to come. As Marcus mentored younger employees who reminded him of his former self, he began to see the true magic of the compound effect. It wasn't just that small actions accumulated into large results. It was that small actions transformed the person taking them, and that transformed person was capable of actions that had been previously impossible. The Marcus who started this journey could never have led a team of 24 people through a company crisis, not because he lacked the title or position, but because he lacked the inner resources. The daily practice of discipline had built those resources one deposit at a time. He began sharing his story, not as someone who had discovered a secret, but as someone who had learned to trust in something ancient and reliable. The power of consistent action aligned with meaningful purpose. Year 5 found Marcus standing before a conference room filled with senior executives from companies across the industry. He'd been invited to speak about the turnaround strategy that had saved his company millions during the restructuring crisis. But as he looked out at the expectant faces, Marcus realized his real story wasn't about business strategy. It was about human transformation through the compound effect of daily choices. He told them about the morning he looked in the mirror and decided to get up when his alarm rang instead of hitting snooze. He described how that single decision had created a cascade of changes that seemed almost too remarkable to believe. Some in the audience looked skeptical. How could something so simple create such dramatic results? Marcus smiled, remembering his own disbelief in the early days when the changes were too small to see but too real to ignore. He explained that the compound effect works not because any single action is powerful, but because consistent action changes the person taking it. And a changed person makes different choices, which create different results, which reinforce the change, creating an upward spiral of growth and achievement. The executive who had been most skeptical raised her hand. But how do you maintain consistency when you don't see immediate results? Marcus paused, remembering those first weeks when his body hadn't changed, his bank account was still empty, and his career was still stagnant. How had he pushed through? "You have to fall in love with the process," he said finally. "You can't rely on motivation, because motivation is emotional and emotions change daily. You have to build systems and fall in love with the small improvements that happen every day, even when no one else can see them." He described how he'd learned to celebrate the fact that he got up when his alarm rang, even before his body changed. How he'd found satisfaction in reading just one page, even before his knowledge expanded dramatically. How he'd taken pride in saving just $10, even before his financial situation transformed. The compound effect requires faith. Marcus continued. Faith that small actions, consistently taken, will create large results over time. But here's what I discovered. The process of taking those actions builds the faith. You don't need to believe it will work. You just need to start, and the evidence will build your belief one day at a time. As Marcus finished his presentation and walked off the stage, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment that had nothing to do with the applause or the networking opportunities that would follow. The real satisfaction came from knowing that he'd become the person his 28-year-old self had needed to hear from. That evening, as he sat with Sarah planning their upcoming wedding, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 7 years ago, he'd been a different person entirely, not just in terms of his circumstances, but in terms of who he was at his core. The compound effect hadn't just changed his life. It had changed his life-generating capacity. He now had the physical energy, mental clarity, financial resources, and relational skills to create opportunities that the old Marcus couldn't even have imagined. More importantly, he had the confidence that came from knowing he could grow into whatever challenges life presented. Sarah looked up from the wedding planning spreadsheet they'd been reviewing. "Remember when you told me about that first morning you decided to get up instead of hitting snooze?" Marcus nodded. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" She gestured around their home, but Marcus knew she wasn't talking about the house itself. She was talking about the life they'd built, the people they'd become, the future they were creating together. "No," Marcus admitted. "I thought I was just trying to go for a walk around the block. I had no idea I was starting a revolution." "That's the beautiful thing about it," Sarah said. "The compound effect doesn't require you to see the big picture. It just requires you to show up consistently for the small picture. The big picture takes care of itself." As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he returned to the same bathroom mirror where his transformation had begun 7 years earlier. The man looking back at him now was someone he was proud to be. Not because life was perfect, it wasn't, but because he'd become someone he could trust to handle whatever imperfection arose. He'd learned that success wasn't about making one great decision. It was about making good decisions consistently, day after day, year after year. It was about understanding that every choice was either a deposit into the person he wanted to become or a withdrawal from that account. The compound effect had taught him that he didn't need to be extraordinary to achieve extraordinary results. He just needed to be consistent. As he turned off the light and headed to bed, Marcus set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. Tomorrow would bring another opportunity to make deposits into his future self. Another chance to trust in the power of small actions consistently applied. Another day to let the compound effect work its quiet magic. The last thought he had before falling asleep was this. Somewhere out there was another person standing in front of a mirror, feeling frustrated with where they were and uncertain about how to change it. That person didn't need to become someone completely different overnight. They just needed to make one small choice differently tomorrow morning. Just one choice. The compound effect would take care of the rest. Because that's how transformation actually works. Not through dramatic gestures or overnight changes, but through the accumulation of small decisions made consistently over time. Through the faith that small actions, when compounded, create results that seem miraculous but are actually inevitable. Through the understanding that we become what we repeatedly do, and that our future selves are created by our present choices, one decision at a time. The compound effect is not magic, but its results can seem magical to those who trust in its power and commit to its process. And in a world that promises quick fixes and instant gratification, perhaps that's the most radical act of all. Choosing to plant seeds today that will bear fruit years from now, trusting that small steps taken consistently will eventually cover great distances, believing that the person you are becoming through your daily choices is more important than the immediate results of those choices. This is the compound effect. This is how ordinary people achieve extraordinary results. This is how small daily habits create massive success. Not overnight, not quickly, but inevitably. One choice at a time.